Before starting to fill the forms in with concrete, we backfilled the hole around the forms up to the height of the forms. Considering how fragile our plywood was, this was important to give the forms the support it would need to hold in the concrete. We decided to rent a mud mixer for mixing and pouring the concrete. We just wanted to try to make this part a little bit easier on us. It took some practice and a lot of adjustments to get the consistency correct, but this machine made this job so easy with no shoveling required. All you have to do is lift the bag, place it on top of the hopper like this. It gets cut and dumped into the top. Adjust the water settings and out comes concrete. We definitely started with it way too watery to start with. You can see water just flowing out here, but after playing with it for a little bit, we kind of figured out the proper ratio, and honestly, throughout the process, it did take some tuning and adjusting. So as concrete was pouring out, I would use either a piece of wood or rebar to spread the concrete and poke in the concrete to try to reduce air bubbles. We finished all 6 footers in I think less than 2 hours. This machine made it so easy. I don't have it shown here, but Eric made a wood template with 4 holes to place the rebar through so that it held it straight up so it would dry that way. So we let the footers dry for at least 2 days before starting on the piers. And we have dry footers. The rebar right now are all different lengths and they need to be cut to the right heights. We did one at a time. Eric used a rotary laser to try to figure out what the heights of each pier should be so that the piers are all on a level plane with each other, instead of using the ground to gauge the height for each pier because the ground is so unlevel. So he cut the rebar here to the correct lengths and he's starting to put the hoops on. We cut each sonotube to get 2 forms, so we only needed to buy a total of 3. And the heights of each tube were calculated using the rotary laser. All 5 hoops are tied on and we centered the sonotube on the rebar tower. This time we are just mixing and pouring in the concrete by hand because it was a little spur of the moment due to questionable weather forecasts, and I'm just poking the concrete with rebar to try to get the air bubbles out. We are using Simpson Strong Tie CBSQ Hot Dip Galvanized column bases for 6x6 posts. The first one sank in pretty easily. I think the concrete may have been a little too wet. Eric made a wood template here that he hammered on to the bracket to try to align it with the strings to get the right offset. We think it sunk in a little too easily because it could not hold itself up and we had to prop it up with random pieces of wood. We use this little bubble level to help us get the bracket level and it was super handy. And here's our first 3 piers. On this one here, we've got some scrap wood and clamps to try to hold the bracket in place. And we had about half a bag of concrete for each pier that we just dumped around the bottom because we just weren't quick enough to use it for the next pier, unfortunately. We used a different method for each pier as far as the consistency of the concrete and how to get the bracket in. We used 3 bags for each pier and mixed and poured one at a time. Here we made the second bag, or the middle layer, a little bit on the drier side, so that when the bracket was pushed in, the drier layer would help hold in place. I'm using a 2x2 piece of scrap wood to tap the outsides to get air bubbles out. And then the third bag was a little bit on the wetter side, so that it was easier to sink the bracket in. The brackets have a huge flat plate that has to be pushed through, and we found it way too difficult to push if the concrete was too dry on top. So we leveled the pier before putting the bracket in. Here, Eric is angling it in to see if that helps. And then it did take some pressure and wiggling to get it to go down. I think here it may have been hitting a little bit of rebar, but with some continuing shimmying, he got it in there where it needed to be, and it was able to hold itself up without sinking. A couple days later, I started backfilling the holes a bit, and Eric took off the sonotube forms. I think we're going to try to rent a loader to finish filling the holes because it is exhausting work with just a shovel. I think the piers look really good, and in case you're wondering why the brackets are in different orientations, we based it off how the girts are going to be attached. So next up, we're going to be ordering our wood and working on the framing portion of this build.